Hello. Hi to everyone. I hope to be online. I think yes, I am. Am I online? Hello to everyone. Yes, I should be online for another story of the day. Yes, the story of today is about the trilogy of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So, Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni, and così fan tutte. Well, these masterpieces would not been possible without another genius mind, the genius mind of Lorenzo da Ponte. So it is the story of two genius minds who met. The mind of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, which name was quite long and complicated. It actually was Johannes Chrysostomus, dedicated to the saint Johann Chrysostom, the saint of the day of the birth of course, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, which was the 27th of January 1756. And then the name was not finished. It was Johannes Chrysostomus, Wolfgangus, Theophilus Mozart. Wolfgangus became Wolfgang in German, and Theophilus, which comes from Greek, which means loved by God or lover of God, became in German Gottlieb, and translated in Latin Amadeus. So this is the story how we name him Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, although he himself liked to be called Amade. And this is about the name of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Also, the name of Lorenzo da Ponte is a very special story, actually, because actually it was not his real name. His real name was Emanuele Conegliano. Did you know this? Well, Conegliano, because you have to know that the family of Lorenzo da Ponte, the librettist of these three masterpieces, of course, Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte, about which we are speaking now, came from a family of Jewish origins. And maybe you know or not that sometimes Jewish families do have the name of the city of their origin. So a person who has the family name, for example, Bologna or Ferrara or Conegliano, normally are persons of Jewish origins. So the story is that the father, who was Jewish, actually became widow at a certain moment, and he wanted to marry again a younger lady who was Catholic, Christian. So what the father of Lorenzo da Ponte did, he decided to convert himself to the Christian Catholic religion. So the little boy was educated as Catholic, as Christian boy in a seminary, and actually he became even a priest. And that's why he had then the Christian religion and also another name, Lorenzo da Ponte. But let's go back to the trilogy of Nozze di Figaro, which was composed in 1786, of Don Giovanni 1 year later, 1787, and Così fan tutte in 1790. Well, what can I say? You have to understand that at the time the real style which was in charge was not the opera buffa, because the trilogy which we're speaking about are opera buffas, of course. In charge was the opera seria. Try to imagine an opera seria, really boring, really static, somehow like a concertante recital. So the opera buffa, of course, at that time was very innovative and very alive, and people loved it. Also because people could really identify themselves in the stories. And actually, Mozart loved very, very, very much comedies. He loved Molière. He loved Goldoni. Goldoni is an Italian, very important comedian writer from Venice. He loved Shakespeare, so he was aiming. He wanted to also compose himself some opera buffa. What he did, and that's why the audience really welcomed so well and warmly this new genre. So it was for the first time performed in Vienna at the Burgtheater in 1786, and it was such a big success, Nozze di Figaro, that the Emperor Joseph II had to, how do you say, forbid the encores. There were so many encores that people would not actually leave the theater. That happened in the spring, in May, and in December it was replied in Prague. Well, that was really such a success that Mozart wrote, everyone is singing my music on the streets. And the success was so big that actually he was immediately commissioned to write a second opera, which will be the Don Giovanni just 1 year later. And just a little anecdote about the Don Giovanni, which is funny, but it's real. He was such a genius mind, Mozart, that actually he wrote, for example, the overture of Don Giovanni in 2 hours, because he had actually to write it the evening before, but he fell asleep. And when he woke up at 5 o'clock a.m. in the morning, he wrote it in a rush because he had to deliver it at 7 o'clock. So the overture of Don Giovanni was written actually in 2 hours from this genius mind. But well, we knew it already that he was a genius mind. At the time, he was 30 years old, but he was already a genius mind at the age of 13 when he, for example, in the Holy Week, I think it was 1770, he was in one of his Italian trips with his father, Leopold Mozart, in Rome, and he was at the Cappella Sistina listening in the Vatican the fantastic composition of Gregorio Allegri, Miserere. Miserere is a very beautiful composition for 9 voices for 2 choirs. So it's a polyphonic composition, 5 and 4 voices a cappella. Beautiful, but really complex, complicated. Well, the teenager Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart listened at it, and at the end of the day, he just transcribed, he just wrote the whole composition by heart in his little room. That happened on Wednesday, and on Friday he went back to listen it again to make some little corrections, variations to his writing, and that's it. This is how the Gregorio Allegri Miserere came out of the Vatican. The father then, of course, hold this music and let it printed in London 1 year ago. Well, 1 year later, sorry. So this was just to say how genius the mind of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was. Well, just another anecdote, he learned actually to write music before writing the alphabets. It seems that he wrote his first composition at the age of 5, something like that. So that was the genius mind who wrote Nozze di Figaro. We were speaking about the Trilogy. So Nozze di Figaro, 1786, first performed in Vienna, then later in Prague. And you have to understand one thing. You have to understand that that time was really, really another time. Compared to today. So what makes us laugh and seems like a fairy tale, for that time it was quite revolutionary. Actually, we are at that time just few years before actually the French Revolution. So the text of the Nozze di Figaro attacks the nobility in a very direct way, and Emperor Joseph II of Austria at that time actually did do a very severe censorship on this piece, and even he wanted to cut at the end of the third act a little piece where there is a short pantomime, a short little ballet. So Mozart did following. He said, okay, Your Majesty, if this is your will, please look at this piece, the same piece, mute, without music. And it was so embarrassing that the emperor said, okay, put the music again. In it, and so it was somehow solved, and they arrived to a good compromise. But in fact, the piece itself, the text was very a real protest against the nobility. For example, the jus prima noctis, so the right of the landlord, of course, to consume the first honeymoon night with the servant was real. So the protest was real. So, in fact, the King of France, Louis XVI, the one who will lose his head in the French Revolution just a few years later, actually said, "This piece will never be performed in my country. Never! Before it has to be destroyed, my prison La Bastille." And in fact, it happened. In fact, the terrible prison La Bastille in Paris will be destroyed in the French Revolution. So we have to understand the times. The times were very, very difficult, very, very different, and also difficult, by the way. In any case, so he was 29 when he composed that. And then later, 1 year later, he was, of course, 30 when he composed Don Giovanni. And after Don Giovanni, it will be the time of Nozze di Figaro in 1790 at the Burgtheater of Vienna. And there is another nice anecdote, but it's true, it's history. The soprano who sang Fior di Ligi in Così fan tutte was an Italian singer, Adriana Ferrarese del Bene, and it seems that she had a very particular technique, and for high notes she would always do this and lift up her chin, and for low notes she would always do that. Drop. So it seems that Mozart did not like her very much, and because of that he wrote in the famous aria of Fior di Ligi, Come Scoglio, such big intervals and jumps, da, 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 because this way he, who was actually funny guy, he liked very much jokes, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, actually obliged her to behave like a chicken on stage. He really wrote this. So this is just to say some little anecdotes a bit about this trilogy, which in fact would not have been possible without also the contribution of another genius mind, the genius mind of Lorenzo da Ponte. Lorenzo da Ponte was a very special person, actually, because he was a priest, but a priest with a lover, and a priest with 2 kids, with a family. And because of that, not only because of that, also because he had debts, he had actually big troubles with the justice, and so he had to leave Italy. And this is how he landed in Vienna, where he met finally another genius mind, the genius mind of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. And in this way, we have this eternal 3 masterpieces, the trilogy. So this is how they met. And actually, Lorenzo da Ponte was also helped to get an engagement at the court of Joseph II, the emperor there, thanks to the help and intervention of Salieri. In any case, Lorenzo da Ponte also had to leave Austria at a certain moment and landed in London, where he was for a certain time an impresario, but things did not go very, very well. He actually had bankrupt, and so he left again for his last destination, which was America. Yes, he landed in New York. He founded there an Italian opera also, and he was the first one who brought actually, for example, Rossini there. He was the one who was responsible for the first performance of Gazzaladra of Rossini in New York, and also for the first performance of Don Giovanni there. And unfortunately, this Italian theater, which was founded by him, went lost through a big fire. But another good thing that Lorenzo da Ponte did there, he was actually the first Italian who became professor of Italian literature at an American university. Yes, and actually, his body is there in America in a cemetery in Queens. Although we don't know exactly the point of the cemetery, but for sure it is there. In the same way, we don't know actually the real grave of Mozart. We know approximately where it is in the very beautiful where I have been. So I recommend you to visit it if you have the chance. St. Mark's cemetery in Vienna, which is a very old cemetery of that time. So the graves are all graves of 17 something, and on the gravestones there is always the story of who is lying there. This was the baker of the emperor family and things like that. That was the hairdresser of the emperor family. So it's very interesting. But yes, of course, maybe you know that we don't have a real grave of Mozart because actually he was deposited his body in a mass grave. And why that? Because, well, Mozart finished his life in misery. Why that? Because Mozart was the first freelance musician of that time who actually opened the freelance profession to us. So we have actually to thank him. At the time, it was not normal. At the time, you could survive as a musician only if you would actually serve a prince, an emperor, a bishop. And actually, he had actually at the start also a fixed position in Salzburg, but he was not very good in such a fixed position underneath a boss. So he left. He went to Vienna to look for his path, his freelance profession, which was at the time very, very difficult, very tough. So we have to thank him for this, for his courage, of course, and also certainly for these wonderful masterpieces, this trilogy, the Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Così fan tutte, written very quickly in the time of 4 years, from 1786 to 1790, with the contribution of another genius mind, Lorenzo da Ponte. So this was a little introduction, a little story to make you maybe curious about that, to go and look for these wonderful masterpieces if you don't know them, or just to refresh and listen at them again if you know them. Yes? So that was my story of the day today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to share it if you want, and we see us certainly very soon for another story of the day. Until then, many blessings and arrivederci to every one of you from Italy, from Capistine. Bye.